Chapter 1. The Seed of the Past. The sun, a bruised orange smear on the horizon, bled light onto the weathered dome, its surface a patchwork of repairs and age. It was 0600 hours, and the day already felt heavy. Lyra stood at the edge of the settlement. The familiar, metallic groans of the dome's support struts a low, unsettling chorus. She watched her people move about, their silhouettes dark against the pale sky. They started their tasks with a weary resignation, a practiced silence filling the spaces between them. The children's laughter, usually a balm, was subdued today, swallowed by the heavy air, a constant reminder of their fading joy. Another night of subtle tremors had left its mark, a palpable tension clinging to them all. Under the thin, fractured ground, a low rumble vibrated, a constant anxiety-inducing companion. Kai approached her, his boots crunching softly on the parched soil, his face as grim as the landscape. He stopped beside her, mirroring her stance, hands clasped behind his back, the image of a man trying to maintain composure in a losing battle. His gaze swept over the settlement, the worry lines etched deep around his eyes. "Another restless night," he said, his voice a low rasp, almost matching the drone of the struts. Lyra nodded, her dark eyes narrowed as she scanned the area. "They grow stronger with each sunrise," she responded, her own voice rough, a product of too much wind and worry. Her hands instinctively tightened into fists. She could feel the subtle vibration through the soles of her boots, making her teeth ache. "The ground shifts like a restless beast beneath us," Kai sighed, a gust of hot air that seemed to match the rising heat of the day. "The water reserves are lower than I'd like. The purification system is barely managing. We'll need to ration again." His gaze shifted towards the east, where a weak patch of sunlight barely illuminated the settlement's vegetable garden, where plants struggled to survive under the protective layers, a constant reminder of how fragile their way of life has become. A sudden, sharp tremor shook the ground, sending a jolt through Lyra's feet and making her lose her balance for a moment, while Kai instinctively grabbed her arm. The metallic groans intensified, turning into high-pitched squeals as the dome's frame strained. "Damn it all," Kai hissed, his grip on her arm tightening before he released it as swiftly as it happened, a silent signal that they were both feeling on the edge. Lyra scanned the area, her senses on high alert. The usual early morning noises became more frenetic, the scraping and clanging more frequent. A muffled cry rose from the direction of the old well, near the edge of the settlement. She started moving quickly toward the commotion. What happened? A young woman, barely past her teenage years with dirt all over her face, came running to Lyra's direction. "The ground, it cracked. The well collapsed. There's a hole there now." Her voice was high-pitched and shaky, reflecting the shock of the unexpected event. "Near the western edge," she added, before hurrying away to join her family. Lyra exchanged a tense glance with Kai before starting towards the reported area, their feet kicking up dust and small stones, each footstep a testament of the urgency of the event. Reaching the damaged area, Lyra saw the gaping hole that opened where the old well had been. It was not a mere cave-in, but a perfect cavity, like a mouth opening in the earth, emitting a strange light from within. The hole shimmered, a faint blue glow seeping from its depths, highlighting the dark shapes inside. "By the ancestors," Kai muttered, his eyes wide as he knelt by the edge, trying to look into the unknown. "What in the world is that?" His voice trembled with a mixture of concern and fascination. The air around the hole was strangely warm, almost electric. Lyra moved closer, her eyes focused on the odd glow. It was an unnatural light, not like anything she'd seen before, not from any natural fire, nor from their own energy lamps. It seemed to pulsate rhythmically. "Stay back," she ordered, her voice sharp as she pushed Kai further away. Hesitantly, Lyra stepped closer to the edge, peering into the darkness. The light grew brighter the closer she approached, revealing the interior of a large, vaulted chamber. There were metallic structures, not like the ones they used for their support beams, but smooth, almost organic, with intricate crystalline components embedded within. The chamber itself seemed too perfect, too geometrical, like a space carved by a precision unknown to them. The crystalline structures pulsed, with a slow, rhythmic glow, bathing the chamber in a soft, otherworldly light, an almost hypnotic, heartbeat-like pattern. It's not natural," she whispered, her eyes wide in a mix of fear and fascination, recognizing the oddity of this discovery. Her heart started to race, as she could hear her own blood running through her ears, the sounds intensifying with each passing moment. A series of aftershocks hit them with barely any warning. They were more violent than anything she had experienced before. The dome's warning sirens blared, a piercing, chaotic alarm cutting through the heavy air. The ground beneath them heaved violently, throwing Lyra off balance. Her people were shouting, the sounds mingling with the deafening sirens and the cracking of the struts. Panic spread like wildfire through the settlement. "The support beams," Kai shouted, grabbing her arm again, pushing her towards the settlement's main structure. "We need to reinforce the pillars." He was already running towards their workshop, his words barely audible above the chaos. Lyra fought her own body, as her feet were struggling to keep balance. She stumbled forward, grabbing a hold of a metallic structure to avoid falling on the ground, her hand finding purchase on a sharp metallic edge, scraping her skin. She felt a hot stream of blood running down her forearm as she looked down at the wound. "Damn it!" She looked again at the open cavity where she could still see the faint glow of the pulsing lights. In the chaos, Lyra heard a scream of horror from near the hole. Someone fell in. She heard a man yelling in panic, just as another tremor hit them, more brutal than the last, causing some of the closest settlers to the edge to fall down. Chapter 2: Chrome and Conscience. The main research lab of the Citadel hummed with a low, rhythmic thrum. It was 0700, and the artificial lights, calibrated to mimic the spectrum of a pale, distant sun, cast long, sharp shadows across the sterile white surfaces of Jax's workspace. Every instrument was in its designated place, each cable neatly coiled, a testament to the order he imposed on his environment. Jax, his chrome implants catching the light, was hunched over a console, his fingers dancing across its surface with practiced ease. He was fine-tuning the energy regulators of the new device, a skeletal structure of polished metal and glowing crystal nodes that dominated the center of the room, its gentle hum the only sound that broke the manufactured silence. He'd been at it for 3 days straight, the data streams painting chaotic swirls across his augmented vision, a symphony of near-incomprehensible data that only he could decipher. A pressure headache pounded behind his eyes, but he ignored it. It was a familiar discomfort, a constant companion in his pursuit of knowledge. A small holographic display materialized beside the console, a pale face with stern, dark eyes peering out from within a frame of complex circuitry. It was Ilara, her voice crisp and businesslike even across the data-weave connection. "Jax," she said, her tone sharper than usual, "are you intending to skip another meeting? The board is growing impatient." Jax didn't even look up, his attention completely absorbed by the subtle fluctuations in the device's energy output. "I am in the middle of an important calibration. The meeting is irrelevant." Ilara's lips thinned. "Irrelevant. The meeting concerning the marketing of your discoveries. The one I took considerable time to organize. You are not only wasting my time, but you are delaying the distribution phase." Again. The metallic tang of her frustration was almost palpable through the connection. "You need to start acting with more responsibility, Jax. We all have a role to play." He finally glanced at the display, his eyes, an uncanny shade of blue, showing a glint of annoyance. My role is to advance science, not to attend to the whims of a pack of glorified merchants. His tone was clipped, betraying an irritation he didn't bother to mask. He could feel the sharp edge of her displeasure and the increasing need to simply disconnect from her and continue with his work. His headache grew sharper. He turned back to the console, dismissing her. The pulsing within the nodes intensified with the change of his mood, an echo of the increasing energy fluctuations within his skull. "Leave me. I'm about to run the first test." Ilara's image lingered for a moment, then vanished as the connection abruptly ended, leaving Jax alone once more with his machine, his obsession and the almost melodic hum resonating within its metallic core. He took a deep, measured breath, calibrating the console with a series of rapid taps. The machine's central node pulsed brighter, a soft blue light that seemed to call him to it. The room's artificial lights dimmed slightly, as a low, barely audible, rhythmic pattern started to emanate from the core of the device, a beat that resonated not only with his machine, but seemed to pulsate right within his bones. He briefly felt like he had already experienced that exact same moment before, with all the accompanying sensations and emotions. Not merely a thought, but a full-bodied experience that caused him a split second of vertigo and nausea. He quickly attributed this overwhelming sensation to simple stress, to his total lack of sleep. He ignored it. He must continue. He was close, too close to abandon the experiment now. He was about to finally achieve his breakthrough. His eyes went back to the console. His fingers danced across the holographic interface, initiating the first phase of the experiment, determined to reach the limit. The node pulsed, and the low thrum grew into a throbbing hum. The chronometer on Jax's wrist displayed 0700. The main research lab of the Citadel was quiet, too quiet, almost sterile. The air hummed with the low thrum of unseen machinery, the lifeblood of the orbital station. Jax's gloved fingers danced across the console, calibrating the complex device at the center of the room. The device, a chaotic jumble of shimmering metal and pulsating energy conduits, was his obsession. Replicating constructor tech was a fool's errand. Most of his augmented peers agreed, but Jax lived for the impossible. He tweaked a dial, the energy within the device reacting with a low growl, a pale blue light briefly illuminating the lab's stark white walls. He hadn't slept in 3 days, the data weave connection providing enough energy to sustain his focus, or so he believed. A soft chime echoed in his augmented ear, the notification signal of the data weave. Ilara's face appeared in the corner of his vision, her expression tight with controlled irritation. "Jax," she began, her voice crisp and precise, "you missed the morning briefing. Again. The board is starting to notice your eccentricities. We have a very delicate schedule here." Her eyes, unnaturally bright due to their ocular implants, narrowed slightly. Jax barely glanced at the projection. "The schedule is irrelevant, Ilara. This," he gestured to the device with a hint of pride, "is where true progress lies." His fingers moved again, further adjusting parameters on the console, his attention completely fixed on the subtle changes within the technology. Ilara's jaw tightened. "Progress that is costing us valuable resources and manpower. Your team is starting to complain. They are requesting more breaks, some are even requesting therapy sessions. Perhaps your methods should be reevaluated, Jax." "My methods are producing results." "Something you wouldn't understand," Jax replied, his focus completely on the console. His enhanced vision flickered slightly, displaying a holographic schematics overlay as he adjusted a miniature regulator. He initiated the sequence, a series of high-pitched whines accompanying the surge of power coursing through the device. A low hum filled the lab, growing stronger, causing the metallic floor to vibrate subtly. He pushed the replication sequence, determined to recreate the energy pattern he detected in Lyra's reports, that strange, almost organic pulse emanating from the artifact she had found, an anomaly in the usual mechanical output of the constructor activity. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over him, the lab walls momentarily blurring. It was just the lack of sleep. He was running on fumes and data-weave energy. His enhanced mind must have misfired briefly, creating a phantom sensation. No need to dwell on that now. Begin replication. He muttered, pressing a final button. The machine responded with a deep, resonant thrum, the lights in the lab flickering, momentarily plunging the room in darkness. The device glowed with a pulsating blue light, as several nodes reacted by producing an erratic array of sparks, as the energy levels began to surge past safe limits. Jax felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. He finally felt that breakthrough. The elusive secrets of the constructor's technology were slowly unveiling, and he would be the one to grasp it. His mind registered a familiar rhythmic pattern in the pulsing energy. A feeling of recognition washed over him as a sharp flash pulsed in the corner of his eyes, then gone, as if a phantom echo, probably due to stress, he concluded. Ilara, still on the data-weave projection, was starting to look increasingly nervous. Jax, that energy output is far beyond the parameters. Shut it down immediately. He ignored her, his eyes fixed on the data streams flowing across the display. The replication was working, or rather, it was reacting as intended, albeit unpredictably. His team members, each at a separate station, were observing his results on their respective monitors. Jax didn't bother to check on them. They could deal with data. They were augmented. They could process endless streams of information at great speeds. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing shriek echoed in the lab, followed by the shattering of glass from one of the station terminals, where a data analyst was monitoring the results of the test. Then, silence. One of his team members slumped forward, head hitting the console, a disturbing stillness engulfing his augmented body. Then, a second, another analyst began convulsing, her body violently shaking, followed by a sudden stop, as her cybernetic limbs fell unnaturally still. Two more team members began to act aggressively, screaming and attempting to attack the other scientists. The chaos was instant and far beyond his expectations. Jax watched, horrified as his team members began to fall prey to unexpected side effects. His body felt cold and his augmented limbs seemed numb. Then his chest tightened. His vision blurred as he saw another scientist collapsing on the floor, foam coming from his mouth and a strange, distorted sound coming from his voice box. It was far worse than what he'd projected, a completely unpredictable reaction to the constructor's tech replication process. Another analyst started clawing at their face, frantically trying to remove the cybernetic implants on his cheeks. The violent shaking intensified. Jax felt lightheaded. This was far beyond any malfunction. This was a system failure, but not a machine one, an organic one. He ran towards his most experienced scientist, a woman named Chrysalis, who he regarded almost as a peer, hoping to reach her before it was too late. But a sudden blackness took over his vision, and he collapsed, his head banging into the floor. Phantom sensations surged through his augmented limbs, intense, excruciating sensations which he had never felt before, causing his system to register a high degree of malfunction. He couldn't feel his arms or legs anymore. He tasted blood, but didn't know from where, as a wave of nausea completely disabled his senses. Time stretched, his mind adrift in a sea of disjointed sensory input, memories flickering in his consciousness, images of his old, long-abandoned home, the smell of rain, the sound of birds he'd never heard. Then, total darkness. He came back a few minutes later with a violent, painful spasm. When he could see again, the lab was a disaster. Kylie was barely conscious in his arms, her breathing shallow and erratic. Another scientist, a young man called Ren, who was known for his efficiency, was now completely still, his skin looking ashen and cold. A faint metallic smell, the unmistakable scent of blood and burnt circuits, lingered in the air. The chaotic reactions had ceased. Ilara's voice cut through the lab, sharp and demanding. "Jax, what happened there? Do you have any idea about the losses?" Jax ignored her and touched Kylie's cheek, trying to assess her condition, trying to find any vital sign. Her eyes were open but unfocused. "Kylie, can you hear me?" She turned her head slowly and whispered, Don't let them." Her eyes rolled backwards and she went silent in his arms. Dead. Again, the cold feeling washed through his entire body, a heavy weight in his chest, making it harder for him to breathe. He stared at her still face, barely believing the intensity of his failure. "This can't be happening," he muttered, but another wave of faintness forced him to lean on the console, using it for support. Ilara's image on his screen looked concerned, yet determined. "I will notify the cleaning crew. Those scientists are not only beyond rescue, they are now dangerous liabilities." Her voice was calm, emotionless as she observed the aftermath of his failed experiment. "Jax, your reckless experiment resulted in severe loss, and resources are now severely diminished. Report to the disciplinary chamber. We will discuss further actions then. This can't happen again. You must contain those outbursts. The data is priceless. You are valuable, Jax." He felt a surge of anger, yet another blackout seized him. He had not eaten or slept. He was completely drained and his system seemed to be working in overdrive. It felt as if a dam was about to burst. His augmented mind felt overwhelmed. His hands clenched, his mechanical joints whirring. He had to stop his experiment. He couldn't ignore those devastating side effects. He couldn't sacrifice all of them just for a scientific breakthrough. Yet he felt his own body was responding with physical withdrawal from a lack of augmented stimulation. Was he truly that dependent on his technology? His enhanced vision blurred as he closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was still on the lab, yet the feeling of being completely lost had deepened. He focused on Kylie's still form. Her eyes were empty, devoid of life. He felt his own hands still shaking, yet somehow numb. The image of a faded, ancient tree was now vividly imprinted on his vision, almost like a physical scar. A memory, not his, which came together with the sensation that something was pulling his focus. His own voice seemed to echo within his augmented mind, synthesized, distorted. "This cannot continue. You will become the same, a broken circuit." He shook his head and tried to clear his vision. He accessed the data logs, scrolling through the sensory data captured by his implants during the experiment. The data showed that his scientists were affected by the energy pulse in different ways, yet all suffered some kind of internal damage. There was a clear pattern. The more advanced the augmentations, the stronger the effect. As he analyzed the data, his enhanced perception highlighted something unexpected, a repeating pattern, almost like a rhythmic pulsation originating within each subject, interfering with their organic functions and destabilizing their circuits. He paused the log. That signature, the organic-based pulse which was causing such chaos, was oddly similar to the very energy he'd tried to replicate. Could that mean that the constructors didn't just use machines, but a combination of both organic and technological elements? His mind reeled from the sheer magnitude of this revelation. He focused on the data weave logs. He ran a quick analysis and detected an anomalous pattern disrupting the data weave, something that didn't fit with usual network data exchanges. This interference, a strange signal, was different from any known feedback. It sounded contemplative, like a repetitive chant or a breathing exercise. Where could that be coming from? He felt a familiar dizziness, and then a blackout. It lasted no more than a few seconds, but his perception was slowly changing, in a similar way to how he experienced after his initial constructor tech replication test, now more powerful. He felt as if a deep and quiet voice was emerging, coming from deep within the data weave. He hadn't felt anything like it before. He had a strong sensation of being watched, a kind of invasive presence lurking in the depths of the network. He closed his eyes and activated his sensory filters. He did it again, trying to isolate the anomaly. Ilara's voice interrupted him again, sounding even more impatient and angry. "Jax, are you even listening to me?" I said, "Report to the disciplinary chamber." He ignored her and focused on the data weave logs again, dismissing her words as an unnecessary interruption to his train of thought. "I need more time to analyze this data, Ilara. There are anomalies in the data weave I can't explain." Ilara scoffed. "Anomalies that can be explained with your lack of control, Jax. You lost valuable personnel and equipment. That's what those anomalies are, side effects from your recklessness. We have contracts to fulfill. Your data analysis is meaningless when our numbers are dropping. The violent ones, on the other hand, they can still serve some purpose. Your experiments are starting to generate resources beyond our initial projects. I need to move them to the training sector, where we can analyze the effectiveness of their reactions on actual targets. Those scientists are not weapons. They need medical attention. My team needs to be evaluated by specialized neurosurgeons. And it is imperative that we stop the experiments before this technology is fully unleashed." Jax was aware he was not only putting his life in danger by trying to shut down his projects, but also directly contradicting the core beliefs that were the foundation of their augmented society. "I will reassign all survivors to the training sector at 0900 hours. And you, Jax, your responsibilities and priorities must be completely redefined. My team will take over your analysis. I have more trust in them." Her face appeared next to the image of the data weave monitor, her eyes staring deep into his, and he felt that she was not just stating facts, but also a subtle threat which she concealed behind professional speech patterns. Jax felt a surge of frustration. They were so close, yet so far. So many discoveries had been made. They were on the brink of a major breakthrough. He felt he could almost grasp the true potential if he only had a bit more time or maybe less dependency. He shook his head and tried to focus again. He had to know the source of the data weave disruption before it was too late. Something was changing in the network, something organic, something alive was present within the circuits, and it was growing steadily stronger. He initiated another simulation, a new test to confirm his findings, and with a sudden surge of energy, the control panel exploded. The wires connecting his augmented limbs reacted violently, creating a sudden electromagnetic pulse which fried the internal circuitry connecting him to the system. His vision went dark as he fell to the floor, completely cut off from his enhanced perceptions, while the station alarm went off, a loud, high-pitched sound which pierced his mind with a painful intensity, in sharp contrast with the eerie silence he had become accustomed to. The blackness this time felt total, as if falling into a bottomless pit. He could barely breathe, his body convulsing, suffering from a terrible form of withdrawal. He tried to connect to the data weave and couldn't. The system had shut down entirely, not a faint glimmer from any corner of his enhanced vision. The station's hum had ceased, being replaced by his own erratic heartbeat. He had never been in this state of total disconnection, and it felt unbearable, like having his own limbs amputated by force. The pain in his body was beyond any calculation, yet a new set of sensations emerged from the darkness, a strange feeling of wind on his skin, a mix of earthy scents, a feeling of cold and the sound of raindrops and a rhythmic chanting he vaguely recognized. This mix of sensations made him panic, his enhanced perception unable to separate those new sensory inputs from his damaged system. The data weave felt cold, like a gaping wound in his augmented mind, and a feeling of something missing took over his whole being, a deep, gut-wrenching fear he had never experienced before. Another, slightly less intense, blackout seized him. He opened his eyes, but his vision was completely out of focus. His own hand seemed weak and strangely human, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. A team of augmented medics surrounded him, their cybernetic limbs and sterile outfits a stark contrast to the chaotic sensations overwhelming his system. They were quick and efficient, their faces hidden behind masks and visors as they attached a series of cables to his body, initiating a forced system reboot. Jax felt an acute pain as he registered that they were directly attaching cables into the point where the data weave connected with his temple, the base of his augmented perception, where he usually felt the most comfortable with. He resisted weakly, but they quickly overpowered him, his augmented body still trembling. He was inside a small room, dimly lit by a row of small emergency lamps. He could see an endless expanse of space from the circular window. The stars seemed blurred and distorted, with lines and gaps he had never seen before. The very space-time continuum of his existence felt distorted and somehow broken. Ilara's face appeared on a nearby screen, looking irritated. His condition is stable, but his implants are completely drained. It will take a while to restore the full neural pathways. Once he's back online, lock him up in the disciplinary chamber. Her gaze seemed cold and distant, almost as if he was just another number to keep accounted for. And prepare the test subjects. It's time we moved them to their new training facilities. Don't forget that, despite their losses, they still serve a higher purpose. She nodded curtly, and her image disappeared. Jax's vision finally refocused, and a faint hum came back to life in his head, indicating his augmented systems were rebooting. He felt his chest rising and falling. The sudden feeling of breathing made him feel strange. What was this? It felt both comforting and strangely uncomfortable. He tried to flex his fingers again, and this time they responded, yet felt less connected to his own consciousness, with an unnerving level of organic, uncontrolled movement. As his vision improved, he registered, with growing alarm, the vivid image of a tree imprinted directly onto his retina. Not a holographic projection, not a memory, but an actual physical, almost tangible image of a large, old tree, its bark gnarled, its branches reaching towards the sky. The image was overlaid with another vision, a long-forgotten sensation, the smell of soil and the faint sound of chanting, like a rhythmic mantra or a prayer. And with those images and their all-encompassing, overwhelmingly organic sensory input, a message appeared in the corner of his vision, not on his screen or his visual implant, but in his very mind. He registered a synthesized voice echoing inside his head. "They seek your humanity, do not give it to them," he gasped, the sound coming out from his own vocal cords, a human sound without modulation, without enhancement, yet surprisingly clear. He was now completely helpless. A sudden wave of nausea surged throughout his body as the cyborg medics, observing from behind, approached, cables in hand and with an expressionless face. He now saw that they, too, had that familiar blue light pulsing deep within their eyes, and realized that their minds were also under their system's control, just as his was slowly becoming. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Void. The chronometer on the Wandering Stars console flickered 0600 hours, day cycle 73. Zephyr watched as the swirling colors of the spatial anomaly painted the viewport, a chaotic mix of bruised purples, sickly greens, and fractured light. The ship groaned, its salvaged hull protesting against the unpredictable gravitational pulls of the unstable region they called the Scavenger's Belt. They were alone again, inside their modified exploration vessel, the Wandering Star, a freighter whose best days were long past. They had long grown accustomed to the silence that surrounded them within the ship's confines. Months had passed since their last crew had become space dust in a previous foray into the unstable region. The navigational systems were on the fritz. Their old sensors were useless against the anomaly's unpredictable shifts. The data weave, normally a lifeline, was choked with static, only occasionally letting through garbled whispers. Zephyr reached out to the console, trying to force the ship's navigation, and exhaled slowly, a metallic taste filling their mouth as their implants registered a drop of blood, a small gash on the right palm. They clenched their fist and sighed. They really were out of practice. They watched the colorful void outside the viewport with detached curiosity. The fear had long faded after so many brushes with the unknown. The ship shuddered again, and they simply shrugged and tightened the seatbelt. As they drifted deeper into the anomaly, the usual debris of broken ships gave way to something else. A structure slowly emerged through the swirling colors, sharp and geometrical, with none of the familiar curves of natural formations or the worn edges of derelict human craft. Its surface was obsidian-like, absorbing the fractured light as if it was swallowing the stars whole. "Not like anything I've seen," they murmured to themselves, a strange calmness washing over their mind which felt unusual even to them. Day Cycle 73. The edge of the Scavenger's Belt wasn't a place for the faint of heart, or for anyone with a properly functioning navigation system for that matter. Zephyr gripped the control stick of the Wandering Star *, their knuckles white against the worn metal as the ship shuddered, its sensors flickering like dying stars. Swirling ribbons of distorted light and fractured colors danced outside the cockpit, a newly formed spatial anomaly twisting the familiar blackness of space into something alien and unsettling. This close to the constructor's chaotic playground, even their modified sensors gave more questions than answers. "Another beautiful day in paradise," they muttered, their voice barely above a whisper, a habit formed from too many solo trips, just like the old days, right? They paused, their gaze fixating on the chaotic space. The old days, how long ago was that? So many crews, so many failed attempts to find connection. They weren't even sure why they bothered looking for this scrap anymore. It just felt like something they should be doing. It beat sitting still, that much was certain. Their hands moved without thought, guiding the ship through the vortex of the anomaly, its navigation system protesting with erratic beeps. A structure, large and dark, slowly began to emerge through the shimmering distortion, its outline too geometric, too deliberate to be random debris. It was something else entirely, and the lack of fear they felt was starting to become a nuisance. It wasn't wreckage, not the usual twisted metal they were accustomed to salvaging. It was a perfect cube, obsidian black, with no seams, no visible points of entry, nothing that suggested its purpose or origin. It floated silently in the middle of the anomaly, and when Zephyr brought the Wandering Star * closer, they could see it wasn't static. An inner light pulsed within the cube, like a heartbeat, a soft, resonant hum filling the cockpit. They reached out with a gloved hand and cautiously touched its surface. A jolt, not painful but startling, went through them, a strange sensation of connection and recognition, a sense of being known. The hum intensified, resolving into a faint melodic sound, a forgotten lullaby echoing through their mind. It wasn't metallic, not entirely. It felt strangely organic, alien, and yet somehow familiar. A relic from a forgotten age. A constructor piece, unlike any they had ever encountered. The rhythmic pulsation sent shivers down their spine, resonating with some forgotten melody. They pulled their hand back, and the humming ceased, returning only once they touched the object again. This was no mere debris. The trading post on the hidden asteroid felt different this time. The usual buzz of bartering and boasts was replaced with a strange undercurrent of tension, a silent hum of anxiety that settled in the hollowed-out asteroid. Drifters moved through the narrow corridors, their eyes darting suspiciously, some of them displaying erratic twitches, their augmentations glitching in unpredictable ways. Several of the augmented drifters were staring at nothing, their eyes wide and unfocused, their limbs jerking erratically as if caught between two programs, murmuring fragmented sentences in barely understandable static. Zephyr clutched the obsidian cube deeper inside their worn backpack and felt an itch on the back of their head. They tried to blend into the crowd as they navigated their way towards the usual trading booth. A contact of theirs, a grizzled, older drifter with a collection of cybernetic enhancements, barely recognized them as their augmented eye twitched incessantly. "Got something special, I can feel it," he grunted, his gaze unfocused. Zephyr showed the cube to them and watched their eye go completely white, while his mouth foamed as he tried to speak. Zephyr pulled the object back. The older drifter blinked hard as he came back into focus and said, "Constructor tech, careful what you do with that. Brings trouble to anyone who touches it." The words were out before the old man understood them, but his instincts told him to follow them up with some aggressive questioning. "Where did you get that thing? What are you planning?" He barked, his hand reaching for a rusty energy blaster hanging low on his waist. They sensed trouble and backed away, their heart rate rising with each step. The air grew heavy with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. The cube, they realized, was more than a valuable relic. It was a dangerous beacon. They had to get out and fast. As they turned to leave, the air grew thick with panic, as several of the augmented drifters suddenly broke into a frenzy, their bodies convulsing while yelling fragmented phrases. "System override, control, lost, rebooting." Their eyes widened as they made a run for Zephyr, their chrome limbs flailing haphazardly. At the end of the corridor, figures moved in an almost military formation, augmented bodies covered in dark combat gear. Their metallic voices echoed menacingly. "Subject identified. Cargo acquisition underway. Ilara's mercenaries." It was clear this wasn't going to be a simple trade. The trading asteroid descended into chaos, a brawl between paranoid drifters and augmented enforcers. Zephyr dove into the throng, pushing past the struggling bodies and scrambling for an exit. They felt the cube pulsing faster within their bag, reacting to the rising panic, and as a sharp pain on their left arm made them almost drop to their knees, they knew they had to abandon their old equipment. They jettisoned their data scanner in a desperate move to slow down one of the mercs and sprinted towards the docking bay, all the while having to make room between a large group of fighting drifters. They barely made it back to Wandering Star as the docking door buckled with an impact from the mercenaries. Engines screaming, they blasted out of the asteroid, their ship rocking violently as laser fire strafed its hull. The chase was on. Laser fire tore through the darkness, narrowly missing the Wandering Star, their ship's hull groaning under the pressure of the constant impacts. Zephyr maneuvered through the debris field, their knuckles white as they dodged a large piece of derelict metal that came out of nowhere. They dodged and weaved, relying more on instincts than damaged systems. But the mercenaries were relentless, their ships more modern, faster. A well-aimed shot clipped their engines and the Wandering Star bucked, losing altitude fast. Not good at all. They muttered, their hand reaching for a small lever to detach an emergency pod. But it was no use. A larger, metallic object entered their peripheral vision. The side of their ship exploded and they were thrown off their seats. They managed to hit the launch mechanism and closed the small hatch with a painful jolt, seconds before the old ship finally gave up and was engulfed by a blast as the pod drifted away aimlessly. The metallic taste of blood filled their mouth, and they could hear a ringing on their ears as the sounds of the battle faded away into the nothingness of space. Hours, or was it days? Everything seemed to blur into a kaleidoscope of distorted space. They huddled inside the damaged safety pod, their body battered and heart heavy, watching the distorted space through a cracked window as the emergency lights pulsed rhythmically, like the beating of an old and forgotten heart. Their trading contact dead. Another bond broken, lost to the void. They had barely known each other, but there was a comfortable silence to their meetings. Another loss, another reminder of their solitary existence. What was the point of it all? They reached out, their fingers closing around the smooth surface of the obsidian cube. It hummed in response, a low thrumming that vibrated in their bones, triggering a sharp, stinging pain as if a cold, chrome-like metallic spike was puncturing their arm, only to disappear after a painful second. They looked around, confused, searching for the source of that odd phantom pain. That was wrong, terribly wrong. What they perceived could only be described as interference, like when the data weave had a glitch, which had become worryingly frequent. Then, through the distorted colors of the chaotic space, they noticed it. Another anomaly, larger, more chaotic than the one they had just escaped, swirling like a vortex of destruction, pulling the debris around them into its depths, approaching at an alarming rate. It pulsed with the same rhythmic, unnatural light they felt coming from the cube, but much, much stronger, and it was getting closer, and they were drifting straight towards it. Chapter 4, Whispers of the Architect. The anima hummed, not a mechanical hum, but a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of the planet. Silas sat at the center of the circular platform, his legs folded beneath him, his hands resting lightly on his knees. The light filtering through the dome's intricate latticework cast dancing shadows on the polished floor, mimicking the subtle undulations of the constructor architecture all around him. It was early morning, yet the air already held a certain weight, a stillness that amplified the gentle rhythm of his breathing and the almost imperceptible vibrations from the floor beneath him. Around him, other harmonists went through their routines, their movements fluid and silent like water flowing in a stream, respecting the tranquility of the sacred space. Silas closed his eyes, not to shut out the light but to turn inwards, to deepen his focus on the subtle energies that flowed through him and the dome. This wasn't mere meditation. It was a communion, a reaching out to the silent symphony of the galaxy, a quest for a glimpse of the grand design, the architect's vision, as he often called it, the underlying rhythm that gave form to the universe. The subtle hum of the constructor's architecture enveloped him, a living current moving and breathing as one with him. He pushed his mind deeper, past the surface of ordinary perception, attempting to connect with the great design through the complex shapes and patterns that gave form to the dome. Today, it felt different, the familiar hum resonating with an almost unbearable intensity that pushed him to focus harder, to push his perception past the usual limitations. His breath was steady, yet his heart pulsed with an unfamiliar eagerness. A silent excitement bubbled under his calm exterior, which surprised him as emotions were something he seldom allowed himself to feel. The familiar constructor-made architecture seemed to pulse along with his breath, its lines more vibrant, the colors shifting in intensity with every slow beat of his heart. The subtle geometric shapes that surrounded him seemed to slowly unfold and become something else. Familiar shapes turned into a complex dance of light, colors intensified, and familiar sounds became a harmonious chorus. Time seemed to stretch and compress, no longer a steady march but a fluid, shifting current. Silas pushed himself deeper, past the familiar tranquil detachment. As he did, the subtle hum around him morphed, twisting into a clear, resonating frequency he had not yet felt before. The data weave, usually a muted backdrop to his consciousness, began to pulse as well, an ever-growing rhythm that started within him and soon engulfed the entire dome. He felt it, not as data, but as pure sensation, a shared memory of creation, a birth of a universe in a kaleidoscope of colors and raw energy. He perceived fragmented images, not as if seeing a picture but as a sensory overload. An old, weathered drawing of a tree, the feeling of rain on sun-kissed skin, a landscape in vibrant greens, all flashing by with an incredible intensity that made his body react with small tremors. It was too much, far too much, his own personal memories becoming entangled with what appeared to be fragments from somewhere else, a past that was not his, the pain, the joys and sorrows of others pulsing through his veins as if they were his own. The connection deepened. It became painful, it became overwhelming, it became dangerous. The early morning light, filtered through the intricate latticework of the dome, painted shifting patterns across the polished obsidian floor. Within the central chamber of the harmonious dome, nestled on the newly formed planet they called the Anima, Silas sat motionless, a statue of quiet focus. It was 0600 hours, the beginning of his daily contemplation, the point at which the physical world faded, replaced by the intricate dance of energy and consciousness. He was alone, perched on a circular platform at the very heart of their sanctuary. On the dome's outer perimeters, other harmonists moved with slow, deliberate steps, tending to the ever-growing plants and adjusting the crystal interfaces that amplified the dome's unique vibration. The dome itself, a masterpiece of constructor architecture, hummed with a soft, almost imperceptible resonance, a song only discernible to those with attuned senses. A sense of tranquility permeated the air, but a subtle undercurrent of anticipation flowed through it, like a held breath. Silas closed his eyes, his breath slow and measured as he sank deeper into himself. The constructor's design of the dome was no mere shell. It was a lens, focusing and magnifying the energies of the world, filtering out the mundane, amplifying the spiritual. He concentrated on the gentle curves of the walls, the way they interacted with the light, transforming it into a living, breathing entity that resonated with his very soul. The familiar hum of the construct was a constant companion, but today it felt different. Sharper, more insistent, as if the very fabric of reality was thinning. He pushed past his usual meditative state, diving deeper, his mind becoming a vast, open space. It wasn't merely contemplation, it felt as if he was becoming a part of the space itself. As his focus intensified, the patterns within the dome began to shift in a barely perceptible way. The soft hues intensified into pulsating, almost blinding colors that swirled and morphed like living watercolors. The gentle hum that always accompanied his meditation rose in intensity, its melody evolving, its harmonies layering and distorting time itself, weaving strange rhythms that resonated deep in his bones. The dome was no longer simply a structure. It was a living, breathing entity, reacting to his expanded consciousness. Sounds grew clearer, more vivid, like individual threads woven into an intricate tapestry. But the physical sensations weren't limited to his space within the dome. Silas became increasingly aware of something beyond the physical realm, an echoing hum deep within the data weave, a shared sensation, a memory of creation itself that resonated within the collective of human experience. During this state of expanded perception, Silas's connection to the constructor network deepened, pushing him to an altered state and causing him to unintentionally manifest as an interference pattern on the data weave. He perceived fragments not simply as data but as full, visceral experiences, a child's drawing done in faded crayons, with a clumsy tree and a sun that seemed to smile, a landscape filled with green rolling hills and strange purple flowers he had never before seen, the scent of freshly baked brie. And rain. These were not mere images. They were accompanied by a symphony of tactile sensations and emotions. He understood these sensations to be his own childhood memories, but also recognized that were coming from different sources. Fragmented images from Lyra's underground structure, the cold, metallic feel of Jax's lab, and the unique, almost pulsating energy that radiated from the cube discovered by Zephyr. The intensity of these sensations caused Silas's body to react. His heart hammered against his ribs and his skin became flushed. The gentle hum of the dome turned into a throbbing, almost painful vibration, and the crystal interfaces resonated, reflecting back at him an erratic display of distorted colors. The data weave signal that emanated from him resonated like a chaotic wave, a dangerous feedback that would be perceived as a malfunction in the technology-focused factions. The dome itself vibrated more violently, cracks appearing and spiderwebbing across its surface, as if its structure couldn't contain the energy that pulsed through Silas. Yet despite the almost painful intensity, Sila's mind felt lucid, his comprehension clear. He wasn't simply seeing and hearing. He was feeling experiencing as if his consciousness was expanding to fill the space itself, breaking down barriers and limitations. He could discern a faint, rhythmic pulse within the chaos of data images, a steady, almost organic heartbeat that seemed to unite all living things, an invisible thread that connected not only human minds but their very souls to the constructor's great design, regardless of their individual path. Belief systems or faction affiliations. The factions were not disconnected islands within a shared space. Their division was a self-imposed, man-made construct. Their true nature was that of individual cells that comprised a larger organism, the essence of humanity itself. He recognized a deeply buried spirituality within all living beings, something that went beyond mere technological or physical presence, something that connected all of them with the origins of the constructors. Sila's experience wasn't simply spiritual or logical. It was a deeper truth that went beyond the limits of either. And its chaotic state was a symptom of a dangerous external force seeking to control this inner spiritual core, by exploiting its connection with the constructor architecture and data weave. Silas transcended his usual meditative state, fully grasping that the visions he had just experienced were not simply divine interventions. They were a warning of the necessity of adopting a collective approach. He perceived not just a future for survival, but a possible evolution, by reaching out to all of the different human factions and having them exchange knowledge, and above all, experience all the shared memories he had just lived, would provide them a better position in their understanding of the constructors, and potentially help them find a more effective path forward. Individuality had brought them this far, but now, it was time to embrace a collective mindset if they were to truly evolve as a race. All of them were capable of going past their limitations, if they connected through that inner spiritual bond that the constructors were trying to exploit and control. That was the real purpose of the data weave. His moment of understanding was broken when a few of the harmonist elders approached him, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and fear. The priest's usually calm features were marred by a deep frown as he stepped onto the central platform, his voice trembling. "Silas," he implored, "what is happening? This is not the path. You have opened yourself to a demon, a darkness." Silas turned his gaze towards them. His eyes glowed faintly, an otherworldly light within them. "My path has always been to seek understanding of the great design, and that path has led me here," he said, his voice calm yet resonating with a newfound authority that seemed to emanate from beyond the physical realm. He was not trying to convince them, merely stating a truth that he felt in his very core. "This is blasphemy," the elder cried. "We must cleanse this dome of its evil." The priest continued as the entire structure around them shuddered and groaned as more cracks appeared on the walls. "You are putting us all in danger. Your practices are tearing our home apart," another harmonist said. "What you perceive as dangerous is simply the beginning," Silas answered, his voice carrying a deep resonance. "We are not alone in the universe. We never were. The only darkness we must fear is the one within us, our blindness, our unwillingness to share what we know with the others. But it is time, and we must move past that division. I will not be stopped, not by you, nor by the walls of this dome. I must share what I have seen with them all. Our survival depends on it." His tone was final, filled with a gentle yet absolute resolve. Silas focused his thoughts once more, pushing his perceptions out like a vast net, a wave of energy. He felt the connection with the data weave growing as the intensity of the interference pattern around him intensified into a visible aura, his presence radiating almost palpable energy that pushed back against the approaching harmonists and any other attempts to stop him. His eyes glowed, filled with a calm yet almost frightening sense of knowing, as he began projecting his visions out across the data weave, images flashing through all devices. The rhythmic pulse intensified once more as he shared the fragmented visions and sensory input across the network, a desperate attempt to connect and show that, even with their differences, there was an essential, undeniable human connection which would provide salvation. The dome shook with increas ed violence, yet Silas remained unwavering. He had glimpsed the architecture of consciousness itself, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5: Threads of Unity. The ground where Lyra's home once stood was a jagged wound, a colossal fissure bisecting the earth, the remnants of their protective dome scattered like broken bones around its edges. A low, rhythmic tremor pulsed from the depths of the wound, a heartbeat of destruction. 1800 hours. The familiar scent of dry earth and smoke mingled with the acrid tang of ozone, creating an unsettling aroma, the death of her previous life laid bare. She saw Kai's face, gaunt and streaked with dirt, illuminated by the flickering lights of their hastily assembled camp, his eyes reflecting the same grief she felt. On the orbiting station that once housed Jax, alarms shrieked a discordant symphony, a death knell echoing through the network of shattered screens and collapsing corridors. Oxygen levels dropped with each progressive tremor, each metallic groan of the station's frame a reminder of the impending doom. His augmented limbs spasmed uselessly as the technology struggled to keep him connected. A dull pain resonated throughout his body. He tasted the faint metallic tang of blood in his mouth, felt the sickening slide of fluids in his eyes, and his breath came in painful, ragged gasps. His once clear vision blurred with static, and the phantom image of a tree branch imprinted onto his retinas. 1800 hours. He was no longer in control of his body. He had the feeling of being pulled into something that was far more dangerous than any of his previous experiments. Near the swirling vortex of the scavenger's belt, a space battle raged. Lasers streaked across the void, turning the inky blackness into a canvas of chaotic light. The skeletal remains of Zephy's ship, the Wandering Star, drifted aimlessly, a broken husk against the backdrop of the anomaly, while they drifted inside a damaged escape pod. The metallic tang of burning circuits stung their nostrils. Their suit's internal display flickered erratically, showing multiple system failures. 1,800 hours. They felt a sudden sharp jolt in their mind as if their consciousness had been hit by a cosmic wave. Inside the harmonious dome, the anima's hum had become a deafening roar. The intricate patterns of light and shadow that once provided a contemplative backdrop now pulsed with a chaotic, disorienting intensity. Silas, eyes wide and unseeing, stood amidst the trembling structure, his perception of reality unraveling with each cascading wave of sensory input. Time bent and folded around him as he saw blurred, overlapping fragments of memories not his own. The scent of rain mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of blood. He heard distant chants and felt the rough texture of bark against his skin. A sense of dread pervaded, as though a cosmic storm was raging inside his mind. 1,800 hours. He was losing control of the constructor connection he sought so eagerly, while his mind tried to find reason inside chaos, seeking a clear path amidst a storm of fragmented sensations. The four of them, once isolated, felt an unexpected, terrifying sensory crossover between their bodies, as if they were part of the same nightmare, their individual realities dissolving into a shared, distorted chaos. The ground cracked open, a jagged maw swallowing the last remnants of the dome. Lyra scrambled back, the earth groaning beneath her. A tremor, stronger than the rest, ripped through what remained of her home, sending her sprawling onto the uneven ground. Dust filled the air, choking her, the taste of ash thick on her tongue. Her breath hitched. The familiar rhythm of her world had been replaced by a chaotic, alien pulse that vibrated through her bones. The rhythmic pulsations, which had been a distant thrum, now pulsed loudly, and with them came images, flashes of chrome, the static hum of space, a dizzying vortex of colors, and a chanting that wasn't from her people. 1,800 hours. Here. Now. Metal shrieked and groaned, a symphony of destruction echoing through the skeletal remains of Jax's station. Alarms wailed, desperate cries in the artificial night, while shattered displays flickered, casting an eerie glow on the disarray. Oxygen levels dropped, each breath becoming a ragged gasp. Jax stumbled, his chrome limbs seizing, his vision blurring with static, his body racked with spasms as the systems that were meant to be a part of him rebelled, leaving him in a painful purgatory between the artificial and the natural. He clawed at the interface at his temple, desperate to sever the connection, only to find it unresponsive. He was trapped, his augmentations a cage of pain, all the while being overwhelmed by earthy smells, the sound of rain, the feeling of walking on grass, and a deep sensation of sorrow he could not understand. 1,800 hours. There. Then the void roared with the chaos of battle. A derelict station spun haphazardly, its metal skin riddled with laser fire. Zephy's ship, the Wandering Star, was a broken husk, its engine silent, a testament to a fight they barely survived. The escape pod, their only refuge, shook with each nearby explosion. They could see the black cube in a corner of the pod, pulsating with a soft light, attracting the attention of Ilara's forces, and, as their pod drifted further into the darkness, they were hit by overlapping visions. They saw ancient trees, herd complex, augmented speech patterns, and an odd melodic chanting, all the while feeling pain as if they were being cut into pieces. 1,800 hours, here and there, now and then. The harmonious dome trembled, a silent scream of stone and metal against the overwhelming surge of the data weave. Inside, Silas felt his senses unraveling, his mind stretching across impossible distances, his consciousness dissolving into the chaotic storm of sensations and fractured visions of a distant past and future, none of them his own. The very architecture of his dome seemed to vibrate, resonating with a frequency that resonated deep inside his skull. A strange organic presence filled his senses, and the familiar chanting of his people morphed into distorted sounds and fragmented memories, as if every timeline and point of view was now a single, terrifying shared experience, where there were no more boundaries or individual thought, and all was one and simultaneously none. 1800 hours, everywhere, always. Lyra pushed herself up, her muscles aching, her vision swimming with fragmented visions, her mind reeling with the echoes of a place she had never known. She had felt metal and plastic against her skin, the sensation of wires digging into flesh and a sorrow that was not hers. The earth still shuddered around her, a constant, unnerving reminder of the world's instability. Her people were gone, her home, a wound in the earth. She needed to understand. She remembered Kai's last words: use it to protect them, no matter the cost. Her hand went to the pouch where she had secured the artifacts she took from the hidden vault. She couldn't stay here. She wouldn't. She needed to seek shelter and knowledge from the drifters. They had always understood the unpredictable pulse of this galaxy. Perhaps they could help her make sense of these visions, this growing horror that was quickly turning into something real. She started running towards the drifters' outpost, her lungs burning with each step, while the feeling of being pulled into became stronger with every second. Jax's chest heaved, each breath a fight against his failing lungs and his own body, which now felt alien. He had lost control. His implants, the source of his power, were now instruments of torture, and he was forced to experience fragmented images, sounds, smells, and feelings that were not his while being pulled, sucked, toward an unknown force. The rhythmic pulse of an alien heart throbbed within him, bringing with it visions of a crumbling world and a chanting melody that felt familiar, and a sharp pain that made him remember the taste of dirt. He tried to fight the sensation. He needed to regain control. The doctors, their faces blank masks of obedience, stared at him without recognition as the network began the reboot, the data weave. He needed to use the data weave. His shaking hand reached for his console, knowing it could be his only chance to find answers, a desperate plea against the rising chaos that seemed to engulf him. He focused his attention on the signal he detected earlier, which led him to those earthy, organic sensations. He repeated the message over and over inside his mind: they seek your humanity, do not give it to them. He had to find those who were feeling this sensation, before he was completely taken by the rising terror. Zephyr felt the pod lurch again, the distant sounds of exploding lasers still echoing all around them, as an unexpected sense of despair washed over them. They held the obsidian cube tighter, its smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that surrounded it. They had lost their contact, their friend. Now, Ilara's forces would be hunting them, and their only goal was survival. But a strong sensation, a call, drew their attention away from the immediate danger. They could sense Lyra's sadness and pain, and the strange sense of metallic chaos that came from Jax, along with a familiar melody that seemed to permeate their entire being. Their hand trembled. They had always lived a life of solitude, of running. But now, a feeling of responsibility, a need to connect, settled deep within their heart, with the same rhythm as the cube they were holding. Zephyr, their eyes fixed on a distant point in space, directed the pod towards the location where they felt those sensations resonating the strongest, ready to take whatever new path their intuition had shown them. They had a feeling, an inkling that, somehow their past and their present would find a new meaning now together, Silas fell to his knees, the vision overwhelming. He could taste ash, feel chrome digging into his flesh, and heard a melodic chant that seemed both alien and familiar. It was too much. Everything was breaking apart. He reached for the cool stone of the floor, anchoring himself against the relentless tide of visions, memories, and feelings that were not his, desperately trying to keep himself grounded within his own reality, his own time. He felt the pull of countless minds, a chorus of desperation and fear that resonated with his own confusion and sorrow. The constructor's design was not some cold, mathematical equation. It was something far more complex, a blend of spirit and science. He understood now. It was the universal heartbeat he had been looking for all along, and which now pulsed throughout the data weave, pushing human minds toward a terrifying path. This forced unity was being done without their consent, against their wills. His mind expanded to encompass the others: Lyra's resolve, Jax's pain, Zepha's grief, and the collective desire for meaning. They all sought the same thing, the truth, and he knew they needed his help. He sent a signal into the data weave, focusing all of his attention on the rhythmic pulse of the universe, sending his intentions of a different path into the network, hoping those lost and confused could hear him. "We must become one, but in our own way, not in theirs," echoed in his mind as the dome broke down, collapsing into a pile of debris. The vision surged, overwhelming Lyra. Images of a lab, chrome, open space, and strange structures flashed before her eyes. She stumbled, disoriented, caught between worlds, but she recognized something in all the fragmented information. A desperate call, not only for help, but for an understanding of the same strange sensations she was also experiencing. A plan began to form in her mind. She would use the cube, the obsidian cube that vibrated with such power, and that she was carrying in her pack, to lure Lyra to their location, a necessary sacrifice to buy time to contact Jax, whom she now felt deep within the chaos, and then connect with Silas to try to understand what was really going on. She reached her hand and touched it, and the object began humming, reacting to her intention. The cube was no longer a mere object. Now it was a tool. Jax's fingers hovered over the console, his augmented limbs shaking with a mixture of agony and determination. He wasn't just reaching out into the data weave. He was throwing a line into the abyss, hoping for a hand to grasp. He sent a message into the chaos, a series of numbers, letters, geometric shapes, a desperate coded plea, embedded with the intention of reaching out to someone who could make sense of it all. And by focusing all of his attention on this goal, he managed to get his system back online. Although reduced power. "They seek our humanity. We must not give it to them," echoed inside of his mind. He needed to connect with the source of the signal he had previously detected, that ancient pulse that resonated inside of him with the sound of trees and rain. He knew his old plan of replicating constructor tech was wrong. It was time to try something completely different. He activated a new protocol he had been working on for weeks, a risky approach that bypassed Lyra's protocols, connecting himself to the data weave, even with the possibility of permanent damage to his neural system, and even death. He had to take that chance. Zepha entered Lyra's former settlement, the escape pod landing with a soft thud in the middle of the chaos, feeling an inexplicable urgency. They scanned the horizon and saw a figure in the distance running through the rubble. It was Lyra. They felt Lyra's resolve, and felt deep inside their heart a similar desire to understand. They pulled the obsidian cube from the bag, and as if it was reacting to the place, it vibrated with increased intensity. The shared images and visions with her, and with other people they had never met before, became sharper, making it impossible to tell who was the observer and who was being observed. They took a deep breath, their gaze fixed on Lyra, and they began to walk towards her. It was a leap of faith, a step away from their solitude and toward a destiny they didn't yet understand but could finally sense within their core. It felt right, for the first time in a long, long time. Silas felt a tug, a connection blooming amidst the chaos. He saw Lyra's pain, Jax's desperate reach, Zepha's loss and his own confusion as if he was all of them at once, their emotions now his, as their voices echoed together in a chaotic symphony inside of his mind. He tried to regain control of the shared chaos, and managed to project himself into the data weave as a clear, defined pattern, sending a message of peace, unity, and purpose, not to impose a path of connection on them, but to give them a choice of unity instead. They were not alone. He sent them a coded message, a pattern made of harmonic vibrations and spiritual intent, creating a space where all their individual paths could finally converge and interweave, a haven of connection within a network of pain. His message reached them, a beacon in the dark, providing a moment of understanding amidst the chaos. The 4 points of light were converging. The true connection had finally begun. They met within the data weave, a strange space between thought, memory, and feeling, a convergence of 4 points in an impossible geometry. Lyra, her hand trembling as she touched the obsidian cube, Jax, surrounded by static and the ghosts of his past choices, Zepha, no longer alone, a constellation of stars tattooed across their face, and Silas, his eyes glowing with an inner light holding the others together. They spoke with voices that were not their own, exchanging memories, ideas, feelings. They were inside of each other. Lyra shared her love for the old ways, for the connection with the natural world and the pain of losing everything. Jax spoke of his obsession, of his quest for transcendence, his reliance on technology, and his fear of the void within him, a fear he now acknowledged. Zepha shared their journey, their loss, their loneliness, and the desire for genuine connection they had felt deep within their heart. And Silas shared his vision of unity, of a cosmos where all things were linked by a spiritual force that surpassed technology, time and matter, the origin of all, the source of all, the connection between all living beings and the essence of what was being taken away from them. They began to understand that the constructor's design was not only technology and natural forces, it was spiritual and deeply rooted inside of the universal essence of consciousness. This connection, now used as a tool for control, was what they needed to protect and nurture within their individua. Realities, and as a whole, they finally understood. This chaotic world, this constant struggle for survival, was not just about a lack of resources or an imbalance of power. It was about something much more profound, a deep imbalance in the data weave's spiritual field, a manipulation of their humanity. And if they wanted to survive, they would have to embrace their differences, learn from one another, and work together toward a new path, embracing their individual skills and using their individual approaches in a more holistic way. It was a choice to connect, not a forced merge, a new beginning. Lyra, Jax, Zepha, and Silas stood together on the edge of the broken world, surrounded by debris, their bodies tired, but their spirits strong. They finally saw each other with open hearts, accepting each other for their strengths and weaknesses. Their former lives now felt like fragments of a forgotten past, and a new future awaited them. The constructor-related activity still continued across the galaxy, but they felt a sense of peace, a flicker of hope in their collective hearts. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with perils and mysteries that were far beyond their reach, but they were no longer alone. They were united, and this time it was their choice. They knew now, deep in their hearts, that they would succeed. They started planning their combined quest, focusing on the need to understand the spiritual aspects of the constructor's technology, so they could not only fix the damage caused in the data weave, but bring a new vision to the universe, a new path where technology, spirituality, traditions, and new approaches could finally work in balance with each other, focusing on the core of what they finally accepted as humanity.